Okay, perfect. So let me just fire this up and just check that you can see what I can see. Perfect. So as I said in the introduction, Simon Ince, based in Sweden, quite a long history with BBC Micros. Been using them since I was a small child, originally from Reading. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Doomsday 86 project today. Now, you may have seen in the agenda that this is part one, because Doomsday 86 is really a project which is a lot to do with the preservation and restoration of Doomsday systems themselves. And then as a sort of second part of this, we have LD Decode, which is the ability to be able to duplicate and preserve Laserdisc, which is a technical subject all in itself. So in this, I really just want to talk mainly about the project itself and how it came to be. So we started the Doomsday, or I started Doomsday 86 unwittingly in July 2016 when I was looking through some stuff that I didn't have and at the price of Doomsday systems on Facebook, and thought to myself, well, why don't I have one of these things? So my first just no knowledge post was on Facebook saying, has anybody got an image of a Laserdisc that I can have? And some of the responses I got back were quite positive. That was how I ended up meeting Ian, for example. And I'll go a little bit more into that in a little while. But a lot of it was the standard thing that you get when you try to do something, which is, you know, it can't be done, it has been done, you don't understand what you're talking about, you shouldn't do this, the BBC have done it, you should just recap it and it would all be fine. These are the typical responses you get. But to me, that's just kind of a red rag to a bull, basically. And then the more it looks like it's difficult to do, the more I'm usually interested in doing things. So the original concept I had is that what annoyed me most is that I'm quite into open source and I'm quite into freedom of speech. And so to have a system that so many people contributed to and couldn't access, I mean, I've talked to people that have articles on the original Doomsday system and they've never seen it on a real Doomsday system. So my original concept was to try to make a system that would allow museums to provide free and open access to Doomsday without the overhead and expense of trying to run it on real rare parts. And of course, you know, there's always a selfish aim. I thought it would be kind of nice to make one for myself at the same time. So the Doomsday 86 project kind of came from that. The idea was to use open source and a complete open chain in an attempt to recreate the experience of using the original system. And to me, you may have seen, if you've seen Doomsday 86, you'll see this strap line that I have with recreating the Doomsday experience. To me, preservation of a system isn't just about emulating a particular thing. It's more about this sort of context that surrounds that. There is a technological landscape, there's kind of a society, there was what it was like to be at school at the time, what it's like to use the equipment that it originally ran on. The GUI that they generated, GUI is a strong word, but the software that was used to navigate Doomsday was designed to be used on an original BBC Master. It doesn't, whilst emulation is useful, it doesn't always lend itself to giving the right experience. And the other thing that I always feel about emulation is that emulation in a bubble is a recipe for inaccuracy. If you look at some of the code, and I know that lots of people are working on fixing these things, quite often the underlying code is kind of a hop, skip, and a jump to get something done, but it's not necessarily representative of how the original system worked. And this is why I like projects like MAME, because in those projects, when they go about emulation, it's all about accuracy. But that's not always the case. And what I wanted was this thing I like to call preservation round trip testing. If something is preserved, I should be able to take that preserved thing and turn it back into the original. So if I can take a copy of a Laserdisc, for example, and then from that copy reproduce a new Laserdisc from it, it's preserved. Anything else is not preservation in my books. And of course, lots of people have different definitions of that. And one of the other things I also wanted, you know, there've been several attempts to preserve Doomsday before, but generally when they stop or people lose interest in it, all of the things that were in that project get lost as well. So one of the really important things to me when it comes to preservation is that the whole thing has to be open. So if I get run over by a bus or if I lose interest, everything and all that work that's been done is someone else can just pick up and run with it. So the project is an awful lot about the technology, documentation, as Ian mentioned earlier, about the amount of things we've been copying and putting on the site. It's about reverse engineering, it's about repair, it's about preservation, and also generating a community of people that are interested in Doomsday itself. So this is why I say marketing is also an aim of the project, because outside of the UK, not an awful lot of people have heard about Doomsday. But now with the LD Decode project and the cunningly named Doomsday Duplicator, people from America, people from Japan, all over the world have heard of Doomsday. And what that generates for the project is whenever anyone picks up a piece of paper that says Doomsday on it, and if they find something, they know exactly who to come to, and we will take that and we will preserve it immediately, which is the way that I've actually managed to build a big website with an awful lot of different material. From all the documents, we have letters that flowed between the local councils. We've been in touch with all of the guys that were actually doing the data collection. We've been in touch with the original team, or they've come to us. So when you're trying to do a preservation project, because all of those parts are spread out across the world and you don't know where they are, marketing is actually a really, really important thing to do. And you really have to be pushing the name and pushing the website and pushing all the time, just because the more exposure you have, the more likely it is you'll get the things you need to preserve. And that's why from day one we had a website where we've been pushing everything. As soon as it's ready to go, we put it on the website. So the other thing is that I hear this even now. It's been done before. Why are you even bothering? And first of all, they say the National Archives have it, and there's two kind of sides to this. The National Archives were given the Doomsday material by the BBC when it was complete. So one of the things that people always say is that the BBC screwed up really badly, and they didn't preserve it. They didn't know what they were doing when it came to Doomsday. That's actually not true. If you talk to the original guys that were involved in Doomsday, they absolutely handed everything over to the National Archives. The National Archives lost it, which is kind of an interesting thing. And that's the reason why we're in a bit of a mess. So when the BBC and the Chameleon project came up and they said, okay, we've actually preserved it now and given it back to the National Archives, what they're talking about is the original film footage. So the original material that was used to produce the Laserdiscs is what's in the National Archive, nothing else. So one of the arguments I've had with people from the BBC actually, and a few people that have been involved, is that's not a preserved Doomsday system. You can give me these digital Betacam tapes. I can't plug them into a BBC master and run Doomsday from them. Therefore, that's not a preservation of the system. It's a preservation of part of it. So to me, it's this whole idea that closed preservation projects, they either result in nothing usable, because you can go to the National Archives and you can ask for a copy of Doomsday and they will tell you no, because you're not allowed to access it. And the trouble with that is that it's not verifiable. We can see on the website that there is a copy of it, and they say trust us, it's all preserved. But I don't know if you guys heard about the Universal Studio fires in 2008, when they just lost thousands and thousands of original recordings and movies and all sorts of things. You cannot trust corporations to do preservation. It's not their aim. There's no profit involved. So we have to do it. We have to care ourselves. And to me, that means that not just preserving something, but being able to prove to others that it is preserved. I can show you copies of the Doomsday system and show you that it is preserved and what quality it's at. So the other thing is when you look at what's in the National Archives, you look at what Chameleon did in their emulation, it's just the two Doomsday discs. It's just National and Community. And actually the AIV system is way, way wider than that. And none of the other discs like EcoDisc or Countryside or Volcanoes are preserved at all. There's no copies of them in the archives, and those discs are falling apart now. So what is a Doomsday system? I mean, when we started this, I didn't have a Doomsday system. I didn't have any Laserdiscs. I had no clue what I was doing. So one of the interesting things is to look at, if you want to start a preservation project where you don't have anything to preserve, what do you do? How do you start something that complicated and get to where we are now? So the first thing is to actually look at what a Doomsday system is. It's quite a number of different components, from the trackball that you used, the sandwich that did all the Doomsday processing and the Laserdisc player, a second processor, the BBC Master, the SCSI adapters, and a Laserdisc that seemed to contain an awful lot of sheep. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But really, there's a whole collection of different things within the system. So when you want to preserve a system you don't even have, the first thing you have to do is make a plan. You have to decide what it is you're aiming at. And I think Ian will attest to how strongly I drive at something. It's like, this is the decision, this is what we're doing, this is the only thing we're doing. You can introduce new things, but I'm not interested. I am just doing this. If you want to do something else or you have a different interest, go right ahead. It's all open source. But this is my plan, and this is what I'm going to do until it's complete. And that's the way that you drive complicated things. You just have to be really strict with yourself. So the first thing was to make a plan. And actually this diagram I drew very early on in the project, and it's still on the website. This is still our aim. So you do everything one step at a time. And if you don't have the bits, you ask for help. The VFF images we could get online. And also I had to get Ian to capture about 162,000 frames from the discs, because when we were doing this, sorry about this picture, Ian, but you deserve it. When you're doing this type of thing, you know, we need to be able to test the things that we're doing. And one of the things that we did notice when we did this 162,000 frame captures is just how many sheep there are on Doomsday. And if you look at any of our demos on YouTube, you'll see a recurring theme of sheep throughout the whole thing, just laughing about the amount of sheep there were in the UK in the 1980s. But I mean, it's hard work to do that. But by doing that, we were actually able to get everything together that we needed to be able to boot a Doomsday system. That was really the aim. So the first thing to do was to look at the equipment. Remember, this is from the point of view before I had a Doomsday system. So the first thing I needed was an RB2. And I wanted something that was accurate and was as close as possible to the original hardware. And I didn't want to spend $100 on eBay to do this. I wanted the museum that I was aiming for to be able to use an off-the-shelf trackball. So I identified things like the Kensington Expert trackball, and we started to produce a thing called Smalley Mouse 2. And Smalley Mouse 2 is probably one of the most popular pieces of electronics I've ever made. It's used by the Amiga guys, you know, it's used Atari ST, people have connected it to Sinclair's. It's a really, really accurate mouse emulator that allows you to plug a USB device in. But the original aim of it was Doomsday. It was to replicate the RB2. It just happened to be really, really good at it. And it gets its name actually from Ian, who, when I was trying to develop it, was just non-stop calling me on Skype every 5 minutes, telling me more things I should add to it. And the only feature he managed to get into it was the name, which is why it's Smalley Mouse. And then there was the problem of, okay, now we have a mouse, which we need to control the GUI, but now we need to actually boot this system up. And because I wanted to use an original BBC master, and the reason for having the original BBC master is that it forces you to do things the right way. You don't fall into the emulation trap because you have a physical piece of hardware that you're trying to interface with. So just in the same way that the Smalley Mouse 2 was a very accurate mouse emulation to match and work with the original hardware, that was what BeepSCSI was for. BeepSCSI, the whole idea of it was to emulate the data side of a VP415 to allow us to boot Doomsday. And again, part of it was to do with, we didn't really know how Doomsday booted. We didn't know how it worked. So what I wanted to be able to do was to have a device that I could pull SCSI traces from to see how the software, when it booted up, how it actually worked and how it functioned. So this was all done for VFS, but it turned out that VFS was pretty much identical to ADFS, which is why BeepSCSI became a ADFS drive as well, and we had a whole bunch of more features to it. But some of the things people don't know about BeepSCSI is to do with the way it can do SCSI tracing. You can actually pull out byte by byte what's going on the SCSI interface. So if you're trying to boot a piece of software like Doomsday and you have no idea how the source code is working, you can actually watch the software running through the SCSI interface. And the other thing it allowed you to do was then actually connect BeepSCSI to another device. So the F codes, which are the codes that are sent over SCSI to control the video interface in the Laserdisc player, actually comes out of the TTL interface that's at the top of the board. And you can plug that into a laptop, and you can actually then emulate a Laserdisc player on the other side, producing the images from these 162,000 frames that I had Ian produce. And then we were actually able to set this up. And in 2017, an ABug, we actually booted this and showed it working. So this was actually ABug in, I can't remember exactly where it was, in the Midlands. And I flew over for it. Ian bought some BBCs and the rest of the hardware, and we set this up, and we actually showed a fully solid state Doomsday system up and running under full emulation. So we're actually 3 years now in the project after we originally emulated the whole system, and so it's been done. And this was great because if you put PyTube Direct in there as well, some of the other really nice open projects that there are around the BBC, you can have every piece of rare hardware emulated. You don't need anything rare at all. You can see in this picture that there is actually an original 6502 board in there, but it works with the PyTube. We used a Smalley mouse and Kensington trackball to get the original thing. And of course, there's no gen locking. So we had a laptop that was pretending to be the VP415, reacting to the SCSI commands coming off Beeb SCSI. And then the BBC was running on Beeb SCSI, booting the original VFS software. So we've had for 3 years now a completely solid state Doomsday system that boots. And it not only boots the original Doomsday disks, it boots all of the AIV disks. We've even now managed to boot and run the North Polar Expedition, for example, which is a very rare odd disk. So then we kind of get into the rabbit hole of the project, which is why 2017 to 2020, you probably haven't heard too much about Doomsday 86, because it's very nice having 162,000 RGB captures, but if you've ever looked at a Laserdisc, they're awful. And if you look at the original VP415, which is a very, very early Philips player, it's awful. The video reproduction of it is bad. It's nothing like a more modern Laserdisc player. It's nothing like a DVD. So we then started to sort of like hunt around trying to find out, well, if we wanted to make a really good copy of the Laserdisc, if we wanted to preserve that side of the system so we could play a Laserdisc, how do we do that? And this then led me to LD Decode, which was started in 2012 by a guy in California called Chad Page. He's called Happy Cube Online. Really nice guy. He was doing RF capture of Laserdiscs, NTSC Laserdiscs, using an off-the-shelf TV capture card that had a specific Linux driver written for it. It wasn't very user-friendly, but it was kind of, it was cool if you knew what was going on. The problem was it looked like this. This was a PAL disc from 2017. The quality was awful. And the trouble with these types of things when you're trying to start these projects is that guys like Chad, that they have a vision. They understand the mathematics. They understand what it is they're trying to achieve. But there is a long road between having that idea and executing that idea as a full open source project with beautiful high definition graphics. And if you don't really understand the mechanics of what's going on and the reason why the picture quality was so bad at that point, you're very dismissive. It's like, okay, I can do an RGB capture and it would be better. But the beauty of the thing here was that he was at such a stage where he couldn't really carry on without a better capture system. And I was at the stage where I really, really needed what he was doing. So that then led us to the whole don't complain, contribute when it's open source. I designed a specific DAQ board that was designed just for taking Laserdisc signals. So the idea of this is that you plug the board into the laser on the Laserdisc player. You let the Laserdisc player play, and you take the RF signal off, and you get it in a good enough quality that you can actually then reverse engineer that back into video again. So the Doomsday duplicator was a 40 million sample per second, 20 megahertz bandwidth. But the other thing that it enabled us to do was that we could stop using VP415s. The VP415s were, as I said, they were awful players. There was a much better player called the 4300 made by Pioneer that was PAL and NTSC. And the great thing about that player was that they were making it up to 1998. So it almost had 15 years on top of the original Doomsday player. And because we were sampling the RF, we didn't need the Doomsday slice. We were just taking everything that the laser was seeing in the player. So we didn't need any of the technology that was specific to that VP415 in order to copy it. In fact, even better than that, by copying it at the RF level, even if there was stuff on the disk that we didn't know was there, and there was stuff that we didn't know was there, the RF copying process would copy it as well. And we did this by making it an open source project so that everyone could see what was going on, everyone could see the mathematics of the test and measurement. I was building boards and sending them back and forth to Chad in California. He was running them against his Laserdisc players and checking them against NTSC discs. And then we were redesigning it until we got it right. And we could see from the test and measurement that it was getting everything we needed. Because there were things like the EFM signal on the discs. In Doomsday, there's data on the discs, which was very, very special at that point in time, EFM. It became what's digital audio on the more modern discs. but we didn't have a decoder. We had no way of testing whether we were really getting those signals. So by doing very careful test and measurement, once we understood what Laserdisc looked like, we could actually use test and measurement equipment, signal generators, to see if we were capturing all of the stuff we needed. And this was kind of like the rabbit hole. We then discovered that, Laserdisc players, if you leave them for 20 years and you don't calibrate them, guess what? They don't work very well. So then the question was, well, how do you calibrate a Laserdisc player? You can call Pioneer and they'll say, what's a Laserdisc player? There's no engineers that know how to do it. So then we had to go down another rabbit hole, which was like, well, learning how to fix Laserdisc players, not just fix them, but actually calibrate them. And we're also able, using the LD Decode technology, to work out whether a Laserdisc player was working properly. We could mathematically measure the quality of the signal that we got from a Laserdisc player. So once you could accurately calibrate, well, once you could accurately measure a player, then you could tell whether you calibrated it right or not. So then we started going round and round in cycles, trying to make these players as good as we can make them. So instead of a 1986 PAL only VP415, we're now using these, effectively super modern, very well calibrated LDV 4300s that give us such a better signal. I mean, we're now getting, with the LD Decode process, it's almost DVD quality that we can get out of the process. So the result of 3 years of LD Decode development, and that's really where my head has been buried in the sand for the last few years, is that we took something that Chad had produced, and he did an amazing job of building a Python engine that could do all this complex signal processing. We moved it to a GPL3 fully open sourced toolchain. We split it up, re-architected it so that we could have different engineers working on different tools in that toolchain. We swapped it for multi-threaded. It used to take about 3 or 4 days to decode one side, 30 minutes of video. We've now got that just down to a couple of hours. We've had some guys helping us out on PAL transform. So it used to be a very NTSC side of things, but we actually have some kind of nice Brits, including myself, working on it now that put a lot of PAL focus in. And we took the PAL transform decoder that the BBC developed, and a guy called Adam Sampson, he took it from the patent documents and re-implemented a high-speed PAL transform decoder that is the best PAL comb filter that there is on the planet, full stop. Fully open source, that's now being used by many other projects dealing with PAL things. So the other guys like Kaleidoscope, for example, which I have a lot of respect for, they're now looking at using these transform filters to be able to do much better PAL decoding from the original source. So we took it from something that was just a piece of hardware that existed in BBC R&D labs. They thankfully allowed the patents to expire, and we've now re-implemented that completely as part of LD Decode. We also have given some love to the Americans with the NTSC side of things. We have a lot of anime fans and those sorts of things using the system. So there is an integrated NTSC comb filter. And I also implemented the EFM digital audio and data decoding. So it's now possible to pull digital audio from Laserdiscs. And the interesting thing is that technology that was used in Laserdiscs is the same technology that they used in CDs. So if you take an RF sample of a CD, you can now use the LD Decode code to decode a CD from pits and troughs on the disc back into audio again. So it has huge potential across many different types of preservation, well outside the original scope of Doomsday 86. So one big example of that is that there's a lot of people now, probably far more people than ever were interested in Laserdiscs, and now working on VHS decode as well, which uses our time-based correction. It uses our PAL and NTSC tool chains, but it takes the source from video cassettes instead, allowing people to take, valuable things that need to be preserved, and even things like home videos that you have on VHS, and be able to get the very best quality possible from those. So again, it's this whole idea of having an open ecosystem means that even though my original intent was just a couple of Doomsday discs, the project has become huge, and it's spinning off in many different directions. So then there's, outside of Doomsday, there's the Laserdisc arcade guys as well. There's a lot of interest from MAME and the game preservation. I think there's 41 known Laserdisc-based arcade games, like Dragon's Lair, which you've probably heard of. There's a system called Laser Active, which was a home console based on Laserdiscs. There's a whole bunch of Japanese anime. We were talking a little bit earlier about Star Wars, for example. there's a huge amount of potential preservation that can be done with the system. This is what it looks like. It's not actually, it used to be really, really nerdy and geeky. Now it's kind of GUI and simple to use. This is actually viewing the national disk, and the system is showing over here the EFM decoding. So showing out, pulling out all the different frames and pulling back all the EFM back into digital. Over here, you can see the VBI information, which the Doomsday system relies an awful lot on the data that's encoded in the vertical banking interrupts of the PAL to tell the computer where the disk is, what frame it's displaying, the type of disk, which side of the disk is in there, all used by the software. And down here, you can see things like the dropout loss analysis and the signal to noise analysis that enables us to mathematically see how well a disk has been preserved. So there's an awful lot of tech in there that you can use for anything. You could put any disk you like in there, not just Doomsday. But this is the thing that I always hear at the moment. It's like, you know, open source, blah, blah, blah. Yes, you've been working on it 3 years. Where the hell is my Doomsday system? But, you know, don't complain about these things, contribute. The thing that we're missing really is a lot to do with the emulation side of things, being able to take these images that we have and be able to use them in a practical way. But I would say that on the Doomsday 86 site, as I said before, we have thousands of documents, pictures, videos, repair articles, calibration guides. Everything that's been done in the project has been published. So even the technicalities of repairing VP415s, pictures of every module in those players, everything is high resolution images. All of the time that I've spent working on those modules, any notes, everything has been put into the Doomsday 86 site. So it's all available. So even though you can't get a full Doomsday system from it, you can get pretty much everything else at the moment from the website. It's also worth saying that LD Decode right now, in this point of time, can decode 100% of the contents of Doomsday. There is nothing on the Doomsday disk that we can't pull back using this software-defined Laserdisc process now. So the disks are duplicated, they are preserved to a degree, the ones that I have access to and the ones that Ian has access to. We can now produce images from those that are near DVD quality, thanks to the technology like the PAL transform decoder. We can pull back the data, all the VFS from using the EFM, and we also get all of the VBI data from the disk as well. Analog audio is digitally pulled back. We even have a technology that I'm working on at the moment called disk stacking, which enables you to take multiple RF copies of the same disk and then stack them together. So instead of just correcting errors that we see on the disk, stacking actually allows us to take disks and put multiple disks and combine the information. So we're actually able to get closer and closer to the original master by taking more and more disks and combining those disks together in a process called stacking. It's kind of a bit complicated maths, but it works, and we've demonstrated it now. One of the reasons why you don't see me handing out nice copies of the BBC Doomsday discs is, well, you probably need to ask the BBC what they did about copyright and how the law works around that. So as a project, and one of my biggest fears, of course, is that we get into a legal wrangle around preservation, and copyright is the antichrist of preservation, in my opinion. And the problem with copyright, especially around the BBC, is that they don't seem to understand who owns the copyright on these discs either. It could potentially be thousands of people. So as a project, we cannot release discs that are under active copyright, because, I mean, obviously it could be the end of the project. However, if you have a copy of the disc, you have a Laserdisc, or you're a museum, for example, there's nothing to stop you from making backup copies of that. That's perfectly legal. And everything you need to do that is part of the project. It's all open. You can download it, you can build it, you can run it, you can make your own copies. So anyone that has access to a Doomsday system can make a copy of the Laserdisc themselves. And we have duplicated all of the BBC AIV discs, except for one of the city discs, which we haven't managed to find yet. So just to talk about the discs that we have preserved, as I say, AIV Doomsday is not just community and national, but the interesting thing about community and national is that it's not one copy, there's actually 3 different copies. If you look on the national discs, you'll see that some don't have anything on them. Those are the ones we call no plus. There are some with 2+ symbols, which are the plus discs, and we've recently found them with asterisks on them. So that these are actually 3 different masters of the same disc. And that's important when it comes to stacking, because you can't stack together ones that come from different masters. but there are actually we know of 3 different releases just of the original Doomsday discs. So even if you were trying to preserve the original Doomsday discs, it's actually 6 discs that you need to do, not 1. Then in the AIV range, EcoDisc, Volcanoes, Countryside, CityDisc, we've got copies of those. As I say, Volcanoes and CityDisc are probably the most problematic ones. So it's the hardest to find. There's also a North Polar Expedition, which is kind of an AIV disc. It was developed for the Doomsday system by Virgin, that follows the transpolar expedition. In the I think it was the early 80s they did that, going from pole to pole. It's just the North Pole part of that. It's an incredibly cool video, actually. There's another thing called Apple Visual Almanac, which is pretty much the American version of Doomsday, actually, which has been preserved along with all of the documentation. And I have an Apple system downstairs with a Laserdisc player that can boot that and run it. We've even had some really odd ones like Counterintelligence. I think Phil Mannering is on this conference. He was actually one of the original developers of that system. I managed to get 3 copies of that. I bought them actually off eBay from the Center for Computing History. And we've actually managed to pull back that and process it, pull back the video. And I'm hoping at some point that myself and Phil will find the time to recreate the original system. Because even though Counterintelligence, it sounds really spy-like, but actually what it is a retail training system for training people in shops selling hi-fis and TVs. It's kind of fun to watch. But it shows the way that interactive video was used in the 1980s as a training system. I mean, if you actually get to play with the system, boot it up and have a play with the way it works, it's an experience all in itself. It's very much worth preserving the way we did things back in the 80s, just to show people how those training systems worked. So I think things like Counterintelligence, the World, the UN, and you, and there's a few other Ivy training systems that we're looking at. Those are all totally worthy of preservation as well. We've even managed to get a copy of the very first interactive video system that was produced on Laserdisc, which is called the Interactive Movie Map. It was produced in the late 1970s by MIT. It's an amazing disc. Unfortunately, they were low-run discs, and the only copy we found so far is pretty badly damaged. But LD Decode will pull back what you need to emulate that system. So we now have a duplicated copy of it. But if you come across any of these discs, we desperately need more copies. The more copies we have, the more duplications we have of those discs, the better stacking we can do, the better quality we will get from those discs. So there's a couple of other things before I stop rambling on that the project also did that you may or may not have heard of. Produced some new hardware for the front loader board. There's a switch in the VP415. Every time you open and close the drawer, it gets smashed to pieces. Terrible piece of design, but the project has produced a replacement part for the players so you can repair them. The AIV SCSI adapter board has been replicated. So if you have a BBC master and you want to turn it into an AIV machine, you can actually make a new SCSI board for it. And that's based a lot on the work that was done on BeebSCSI. And somebody else, I forget whom, produced a version of the Winchester interface as well, just based on the same code. Again, using open source to do these things. With Dave, Mr. Arcadian, we were actually able to get back the Doomsday BCPL source code. That was found on an A500 that was going to a French guy, Xavier, you've probably heard of him. He allowed us to image the disk, and by reverse engineering that, we actually found most of the BCPL source code, the original Doomsday source code. And I've actually been working with a guy called Richard, who's the original inventor of BCPL, and he's been looking at making a new build environment for that and rebuilding the source code. But I have actually managed to compile, well, not compile with BCPL, but run the source code on an Archimedes and get it to boot. There's also complete schematics for the BBC Master 128 in KiCad, the 65C102 board in KiCad. Again, this is all like, documenting everything around the system to make sure it's reproducible. Believe it or not, there were no schematics for the second processor board that had been confirmed. So I ripped apart a 65C102 board and reverse engineered the schematics from it. And also all the logos that you see and all these nice things that are on these pages, these are all open licensed images now that you can use. So when people are talking about Doomsday, they can just download all of the material they need, including pictures of all the equipment and the computers. So Also, if you want to repair a VP415 or you want to repair a 4300, all of the technical documents, there's how-tos, everything is all online. So what's left? Still a lot of work on LD Decode. LD Decode is one of those projects that's never going to end. You can always make a software decoding system better. It's never going to stop. I think for me, the main things is to get it to work with Doomsday and make producing Doomsday copies as simple as possible. There's still a little bit way to go on that, mainly on the data side of things. I would like it to be able to duplicate a disk and then verify the ADFS image straight from within the tools. On the video side of things, adaptive processing, being able to sort of adjust automatically for the way disks are mastered, then they're not all mastered properly. So we're looking at things like automatic gain control. This is mainly Chad that's looking into this. And also the ability to kind of like decouple the parts of the tool chain as much as possible, especially the chroma decoder with things like PAL transform. We want it to be a separate tool that anyone can use. And there's also a lot to be done on the stacking side of things. At the moment, we can stack video, but you can't stack data and you can't stack audio. So there's more work to do there. And for me, I always like my tools to be easy to use. So I'm kind of a big believer that they should be GUI rather than command line. So when you see a lot of these like LD analyze tools and the things for using your workstation to be able to look at the Laserdisc and measure the quality graphically, those tools are all in this tool chain now that I've been developing, and I want to do more. I want to make it more and more automatic. So you need less and less skill to be able to use the system. And of course, there is still on the Doomsday 86 side of things doing the VP415 Laserdisc emulation as well, so that we can actually produce a system and give it to museums. That's in progress at the moment. And I'd just like to say that a lot of people, especially members of Stardot, have donated money and material, discs and time to the project. It's not like I've been standing on my own. Most of those donations have gone into buying discs that can be duplicated. So a big thank you to people that donated. I'm sure a few of them are watching this. And just remember, if you buy a Smalley Mouse 2 or a Doomsday duplicator or a BBC BeebSCSI from anywhere, nothing comes back to the project. These are open source things. So if you want to donate and you want to help us out, make sure you donate directly, because there's a button on our website that you can use to provide us with funds. All of those funds go on buying equipment and material to be able to continue the project. That's it from my side. A Q&A, I guess, is up next.
Simon, where are you up to with sorting out the gen locking of the image from the player and the BBC master? Because obviously that's everything else is working at the moment, but that would seem to be the missing step, which would actually bring the whole thing together.
Well, my aim is to use an FPGA-based system to do the gen locking, to mix the video together. So the easy route would be to take in emulator and do kind of what Chameleon did quite badly, and add in the SCSI. Don't laugh at that. It was poor, but it worked. But they added in, like, still frame support that could be overlaid. It's quite a fast route to do that, to just emulate the VP415. You use the image, and it will be quick and easy. But I'm not really interested in doing that. If anybody else wants to do it, they're more than welcome to. What I want is an FPGA system that takes the RGB coming from the master, gen locks it with a produced VP415 image that's running on the FPGA, and then outputs that through a SCART connector, just like the original. So you could take an original AIV system, drop this little box in, and it would become the VP415. So it's really an extension of BeebSCSI to make it into a full multimedia system. And that's what I'd like to see. But of course, everything is open. So if anyone wants to, I don't know, run with doing it with BBEM, for example, go right ahead. Everything you need is there. But from my side, it will be FPGA based.
Well, I'd like to say thank you, because it's been extremely interesting, if nothing else.
You're more than welcome.
Not that I'm ever going to be able to do any work for you, but I'll certainly enjoy the results.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really nice to be able to walk into somewhere like the Center for Computing History and have 20 Doomsday systems sitting there waiting for people to use, and they never wear out and they never break. That's my dream in all of this. But still having the same experience of using the original system, a proper BBC master. We'll see. I mean, if I get there, I get there. If I fail, then everything is open, everything is online. Someone else can just pick up that torch and run with it. But I think if it wasn't for the LD Decode rabbit hole, we'd have been there a while ago. But LD Decode in itself is a super cool project, and that's hopefully I'll do another talk in the future, just on the LD Decode side of things, because that's a it's a science lesson all in itself.
Sorry, but failure is not an option.
I'll try not to fall off my bike anymore.
So, are you still looking for kind of any disc that's not a film or TV series? Did I get that idea right?
Yeah, I mean, we have to kind of separate the universes out. There is the Doomsday 86 project, which is more around. It's a lot to do with Doomsday. Personally, I'm interested in preserving any system that is to do with education. I mean, for me, my passion is preserving education systems, of which Doomsday is the sort, and things like counterintelligence. And I know there's some British rail training discs out there and a few others. Phil is an encyclopedia on these systems, and I'm interested in all of those. The problem we have at the moment is that there isn't a kind of duplication system sitting in a museum or somewhere central. That's why Ian has a full duplication system. But he's in the Midlands. So if anyone has a disc that is interesting and they can get it to him, or they're around that area, then we can duplicate it in the UK. You don't have to send it to me in Sweden. Or if you have material, you're quite welcome to send it to me. I will duplicate it and very carefully send it back again. So I mean, anything that looks interesting, just get in touch.
Where are these Laserdiscs found in general? Most
of them are eBay. Some of them are the more American ones I've got from quite obscure sources. People. It goes back to this marketing thing I was talking about, where everybody knows who I am when it comes to Laserdiscs. So when someone finds something weird, they quite often drop myself or Ian or one of the team members an email saying, "I got this really weird thing. Is this interesting?" And that's where we get the most interesting ones from. Other than that, it's having a lot of searches out on eBay and having deep pockets to be able to outbid people that are just hoarding them.
Well, I got outbid on a load of British Rail discs within the past week that were the London Tube underground training discs. They had a simulated tube train, and we actually know it was run on a BBC as well.
Yeah, so we've got documentation about it from the material that Phil provided to the project in a book showing the system. So we know that there were more BBC-based IV systems out there, and we've got there's a lot of material that we have to be able to research and work out anything about these different discs. So if you do see something unusual, just get in touch. I mean, the worst you'll get back from me is I'm not interested. But if I'm not interested, you can build your own duplication system. That's the beauty of an open project. You're welcome to do whatever the hell you like. I am not the gatekeeper on preservation.
Do you know how widespread they were in schools back in the day? And I was at school really smack bang in the middle of this, and I only remember seeing one once, and that was in French. Walking around, I'm sure we're walking around a French town, and it was a sort of a 3D image of a street you're walking down. That's the only memory I have of it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that was the interactive video in schools French one. The Centre for Computing History actually has a complete set of those discs, and I have some documentation. I think the software they used was a thing called Soft Options, which was another IV system. That's actually preserved and backed up and on the Doomsday 86 site. But I haven't managed to get any of those discs yet. I would love to come to one of the museums and with a duplication system and take a copy. But there were probably, I think they said they sold 1,000 or so systems. I mean, they were really expensive back in the day. Like you're talking the price of a small family car to buy a Doomsday system. And so that they really, I mean, from a project perspective, Doomsday was very successful. It did what it said it was going to do. From a kind of like delivering that to the public, I would say it was quite an abject failure. I mean, as I say, there's a lot of people that contributed to Doomsday that never got to saw their articles, never got to use the system. And, most people that have Doomsday systems now, if you go around their house and you say, "Hey, can I use your Doomsday system?" they're scared to turn the damn thing on in case it doesn't work again. So, I mean, it's really, lots of people contributed. There were thousands and thousands of contributors. Very, very few systems were actually sold, and very few were accessible. But there are some surprising things. Like one of the Doomsday systems I have, it's actually the only known surviving export Doomsday system. It was bought by Gothenburg University's Department of English Studies on the west coast of Sweden. So I actually have a Swedish Doomsday system. It's the only one we've ever found. But I think it's AVC22, the serial number. Yeah. So believe it or not, even though it wasn't that popular, it moved around. It's just most of those systems, of course, have gone, and they all disappeared into skips, I guess.
Well, clearly my school had one because I've seen it. It was in a room off the library, and I only saw it once. So I presume, due to the cost, they just were too scared to use it. That's the only thing I can.
Yeah, and actually, if they were using the interactive video in school system, IVIS, it may not have been a Doomsday system actually. The IVIS system used a serial link and a more standard. I think they used the VP410 rather than the VP415. So you could use a Doomsday system if you had one, but they actually sold a cheaper system that because the disc didn't have any data on. So it was the Doomsday disc was special because they had the data, and that's why you needed a special Laserdisc player. Well, a lot of the other interactive video systems just use standard serial links.
Very briefly on that point, one of the things that happened quite often was the local education authority would buy a system and send it around the schools in rotation purely because of the cost.
Doomsday on a trolley.
Yeah.
That's certainly what happened where I was at school. So
yeah.
Well, that sounds like the sort of thing would have happened here too. Yeah, so
those Laserdisc players really like to be moved around as well. They must have lasted a whole week before they broke.
I haven't got any questions, but I was writing a few notes down as you were talking. Firstly, it's a great presentation, Simon, and amazing project. Daniel, I think, was picking up on the gen locking. I was just wanting to add to that the counterintelligence disk was actually IBM PC based. So it'd be interesting if any hardware, by means of a sort of shout out if this video ends up on YouTube, if any of the kind of FPGA wizards could have a look into duplicating some of the more obscure bits of hardware like the VideoLogic IV2000 and IV3000 that did the gen locking on the PC side of things. A quick pick up on what you were saying about corporations not being able to rely on corporations backing up things. The BCPL thing, I was actually at the talk at the Centre for Computing History, and the guy who wrote the BCPL, you know this, but just for the benefit of the video, he didn't actually have a copy of the source code. So that was a nice thing where the decode software and the duplicator and Dave's copy on it was on a RISC PC. Just bringing people together that enables these things to be restored. And final point, you mentioned the counterintelligence disk. If anyone watches this on YouTube and they're collectors of discs like Ian, I'm actually looking for a disc produced by Alan McFarlane. He's an anthropologist. He produced, actually before the Doomsday project, he produced a disc called the Naga disc. And he was then one of the main consultants on the Doomsday project. So that'd be a nice disc to be able to. I know the Centre for Computing History has got a few copies, but it'd be a nice disc to do that stacking system that you were talking about. The other one Ian mentioned was a British Rail disc, but that was specific to the London Underground. As well as working on counterintelligence, I worked on a British Rail disc called Antics and Semantics, and we haven't been able to find a copy of that anywhere. So if anyone's got a copy of that, that'd be brilliant. yeah, as I say, wonderful presentation and great work.
Yeah, and you know, one of my intents is to get well, actually, Phil, you know, we've discussed this before, trying to get a Laserdisc player calibrated and set up and shipped over to the UK so that we can put that somewhere to make it a little bit somewhere central, southeast, to hopefully help out the museums and also get some duplication done of discs that people have. But I mean, it's still, even if you have a Laserdisc player that's calibrated and you want to do duplication, you still have to have some basic knowledge to be able to maintain that system and check that it's duplicating properly. It's not something at the moment you can just drop in someone's hands. So I'm hoping at some point we can get someone closer to the museums to be able to help us to do these duplications and get these systems set up. And you know, one of these days we might even solve the copyright problems we have to allow us to distribute preserved copies and do something with them. But I haven't seen any solutions coming from the BBC on that one just yet.
Yeah, it was more just a shout out really to people who've actually got the physical discs, so that they can, so that we can do that process. Not that they can do it themselves. Well, if they can do it themselves, even better. But yeah.
The more duplicators we have in the wild, the more things are going to be preserved, and the more rare things that will pop up. So I mean, that's again going back to the open project. Hopefully, I think there's some guy in, I can't remember where he's based, but he's produced 30 or 40 Doomsday duplicator systems now, and has been making them and selling them as cheaply as he can. So we're about to have an explosion of people that have Doomsday duplicators and the ability to duplicate discs. So I mean, 30 is like, you know, going up by 300%. It's generally about 5 or 6 of us at the moment.
Yeah. Another thing, one last thing that I forgot to add on to that. You mentioned using the duplicators to do the VHS. I know Alan McFarlane's got a massive library of old both VHS and the old compact digital video tapes that I think was it JVC produced. So yeah, just brilliant that it's usable for that as well.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in that, connect to our Discord server. We have a Doomsday 86 project Discord server, and all of the guys working on the VHS decode, they're all hanging out there discussing ripping apart VHS players and all sorts of crazy stuff. You're more than welcome to join them. We have a public Discord server that you can join in and discuss with all the devs on all the different sides. Even people that aren't particularly interested in Doomsday are there doing all sorts of crazy stuff with the tech.
One thing to note, I would be happy to actually take my duplicator over to a museum, but the problem I have is I can only sample a few discs in a day, and it's sort of 5 hours round trip in the car. But I'd be happy to take it over there if someone's willing to sit there and drive it for a week or two.
Yeah, we talked about this, didn't we?
Yeah,
and we can get like sort of dual runs. I could drive over and pick you up on the way, and we could maybe have a set day or weekend that we back up the discs that people have contributed for backing up purposes. You know, maybe get some forum or web page set up to arrange that. Organize it.
Do you think this is something that libraries might be interested in doing? Not having a duplicator, but maybe one of you guys going there for the day?
How do you mean?
Oh, well, either for any discs they've got or for public who could bring them in on those days. I mean, I appreciate it's going to be not that many people, but
that's a good point, because I'm sure I live 3 miles from library headquarters of Wales in Mold, so and I used to work there, so that'd be, I hadn't actually thought of that. It's a really good idea, Tricky. We can see what Laserdisc material they've got. In fact, I might do that on Monday.
I will say I have actually contacted a few of my local universities to see if they've got any Laserdiscs remaining. But most people just go, what are those? it's finding the right person to talk to.
Yeah, and that's the forum. The wider we can spread the message, and the more marketing we do, talking to people about laserdiscs and these rare things, the more likely we are to find things that we need. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mentioned the Naga disc and Antics and Semantics, but that was just sort of my pet favorite, as you mentioned earlier, Simon. There's that whole catalogues that I've scanned in of discs that were available. Some you can find searching online, and where universities have got they've actually catalogued stuff that they've got. But yeah, that's a good idea to go through maybe some of these IV listings that I've got in the booklets produced by the National Interactive Video Centre. Yeah, it's a good idea.
This looks like a good point for me to step in and wrap this one up. Any final things, Simon?
No, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Really appreciate it. It's nice to have, for you guys, I guess it's worth having a virtual ABug. For me, it's the best thing ever, since I'm not in the UK. So I appreciate the organisation and the opportunity to scream a little bit about one of my passions. Thank you.